Chapter 22, Owr-gen. The children covered their eyes from the blast of Owr's pure light. Rashawn tried desperately to put his finger in the proper place before squeezing his eyes closed, but in the glaring light he could do no more than press his finger down and hope it landed on the last word he had read. "Rashawn, what is happening? Why have you stopped reading?" boomed Simon. "I can no longer see the writing on the page. It will pass. Just be patient," Rashawn responded in a calm voice. As the words left his mouth, the light in the room dissipated and the screen quickly changed to a panoramic view of the entire cosmos. Uncovering their eyes, the children sat back in amazement as they saw a familiar object penetrating the blackness of the Owr-gen. The lamp beside Rashawn was now brighter than the screen's display, and his eyes quickly adjusted. He examined the cross shape stretching across the universe. "My finger," he thought as he glanced down to find his place on the page. "This is not where I was reading." As he focused on the new words, the bottom of the page shifted. Rashawn stared at the writing and did not recognize anything on the page. Suddenly, he had a glimpse of the words within the lower paragraph squirming across the parchment. He shook his head in amazement. "My eyes must be playing tricks on me. How long have I been reading? Surely those words did not just move. I must have lost my place." He examined the page numbers and realized that he was several pages from where he had been when the light flooded into the theater. "The screen is not moving," declared Alyssa. "That is because Rashawn is not reading," Connor informed her. "We're ready, Rashawn, whenever you are." Rashawn was still trying to grasp what had happened with the Book of Tab-Neithiod. I seem to have lost my place. I thought I was past this page. There is nothing in this chapter that looks remotely familiar," Rashawn replied as he strummed forward to the last page he remembered reading. "Maybe it is one of the secret codes that Owr uses," suggested Aaron. "You mean the encoded messages that we see when the screen splits but we don't hear anything?" Joshua asked Aaron, hoping he used the right terminology. "Yes, that is what I mean." She momentarily looked at Joshua and grinned. "Rashawn," Sarah started with a shaky voice, "Owr said that it is very important that you read carefully because that reading would guide us on this journey. If you are lost, what will happen to the story?" "Sarah, it is all right," assured Rashawn. "Should I start where I now find my finger, or do I move ahead to the page we were on?" With that thought, a low rumble vibrated through the theater. Then a strong jolt knocked Rashawn off his stool and the theater went completely black. Each person sat at attention anticipating the next event. Rashawn moved to his feet while holding the stool close. A sweet aroma filled their nostrils and a gentle warm breath caressed each face. Then from out of the darkness came Owr's beautiful voice. "Remember, the Book of Tab-Neithiod holds every event, every secret of eternity. There are codes upon codes and secrets tucked away on every page. Rashawn, I have moved the words of the book, not your finger. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Now continue. Do not doubt the words I put before you, for I have laid out the story in a specific order for you to follow. It is for the sake of understanding the patterns that I unfold these events before yours and the children's eyes." Still sitting in darkness, the fragrance lingered just a moment longer. Then Rashawn's lamp flickered back on, and the screen showed the brilliant splendor of Owr-gen. The heavens stood still. Those in Owr-gen could sense that something spectacular was about to happen. Negad and the Angelics within the communication center halted all transmissions and came out of the headquarters dome. "The great unknown is so bright," commented one of Negad's men. "Is that because the Owr-gen has been emptied out?" "I am not sure, but something has changed, judging by the intense light," responded Negad. As he spoke, everyone looked toward the sky. "We have not received any new orders. I wonder what is going on." By now, all of the angelics and animals within Owr-gen had moved out into open areas in order to gaze at the great unknown. A wave of conversation traveled through the air in different directions from the communication center. All of Owr-gen was examining the brilliant sky. Every eye began to search the sky for something unusual. "Look at that!" yelled two Abirs, shooting across the sky. They pointed in the direction of an enormous face. The two Abirs heralded their find to all in the land. When they moved to the southern section, they discovered an outline of a pair of massive hands as well as the face in the northern sky. "Nagad, who is that?" asked Amalek. Taking a moment to examine the outline of the soft eyes far above, Nagad replied, "That is Jerahab." "Do you remember the story of how Owr stood in the great unknown before the universe was created?" "Yes, I do," came a voice from behind Nagad. Nagad whipped around to see his dear friend Shatar standing ready to embrace him. The two hugged and shared a handshake. "Shatar, I am pleased that you have come to the west side," Nagad jested. "I hope you have news of what is happening." "I thought you might know. After all, you are the one in the communication business," Shatar laughed. "I apologize for the interruption. Go on with what you were saying." "I was just recalling Owr's story of creating the Table of Happenings and how after he established all events, he stood within the nothingness in order to call forth the heavens. After we were created, Owr created the stones of fire." Nagad's words were heavy with awe. Oh, what a glorious event that was when Owr called forth the stones of fire. We all sang in one voice, rejoicing at the splendor he had made. Afar was the jewel of them all. Shatar could feel himself angered by his next thought, but now it sits empty and without form. "I would not let that concern you, Shatar. You now have the Elenthial host to keep you busy." The two sighed as if comforting one another and began to examine Jerahab's face again. Suddenly, a slight rumble from Salem ushered in a quaking roar. Several of the children had inched forward in their seats to get a better look at the faint outline of Jerahab's face. Connor and Micklehee stood and used their fingers to trace an outline of what they saw. "Rashawn, we see his face, but how do we know that is Jerahab and not Kohengal?" asked Connor. "Well, we just heard the conversation between Nagad and Shatar," Rashawn responded as he looked briefly up from the page. Immediately, the screen separated into 3 equal parts. A gasping noise filled the theater as the children saw Jerahab, Kohengal, and Nikemabed in their positions. Micklehee leaned over and whispered to Connor, "I guess that answers your question." The two sat back down in their seats. The children saw Kohengal leaning over the Table of Happenings inside the Elenthial Hall, Nikemabed hovering over the dark waters of afar, and Jerahab standing, looking down at a massive sphere between his hands. His tender face was now clearly visible. Aaron stared at Jerahab's section of the screen. "Is that the universe in his hands?" "No way. Do you know how big he would have to be to do that? And anyway, if he was that big, he wouldn't fit in the great temple," Micklehee quickly retorted. "That's not true," Aaron shot back. "Look at the size that Nikemabed became when he covered the waves before the angelics ate of the eternal tree. Or what about the size the Ophanim became when they collected the fallen angelics before they were thrown into the abyss and Sheol? The Ophanim were so big that they easily covered the waves and cosmos combined." "Right, but that was inside the universe, not outside of it," Connor defended his friend. Rashawn was sitting quietly, letting the children share their thoughts and hopefully come to a solution. He soon decided, however, that the conversation was ripe for explanation. "All right, children," he began. "This is good. You are trying to understand what we are seeing. I am confident that the text will reveal to us the purpose of each of their positions. We must not think that there is a limit to what Jerahab can do." "So you think he is outside of the universe?" Micklehee questioned. "I know he is. One of our problems is that we do not fully understand how everything works. We have limited our understanding to what we can see. So far, our journey has disproved every limitation we once set. Therefore, the thought of Jerahab moving outside of the universe should not be any harder to accept than any of the other unexplained things we have already witnessed. Instead of using our energy in trying to figure out Jerahab's position, let us rely on the text to reveal what we need to know." Rashawn finished addressing the children and decided to return to the Book of Tabnithiad. Jerahab's screen came to life. Jerahab was visible from the waist up. He looked at the universal sphere between his hands. How beautiful you were when we formed you. How glorious it was when your heavens were full of rejoicing angelics. The blackness that was created in response to your existence is now contained within your boundaries. Do not moan. Do not cry. It is all within our plan. You will shine again and speak of our glory. When we established your story, you were not forgotten, Jerahab whispered in such a low tone that the children almost missed his monologue. Rachel leaned over to Joshua and asked, "What did Jerahab mean, the blackness which was created in response to your existence? I thought the blackness was the Asoavel. Is he saying that he created that too?" "It is Asoavel," Joshua softly responded. "It sounds like he is saying the Asoavel was a byproduct of the creation of the universe." "Should I ask Rashawn?" "No, I bet we'll understand it soon." Jerahab's presence radiated an intense light which filled the great unknown. He remained still with the sphere in his hand. Then, without a sound or hint, he turned to his right and slowly moved in that direction. He appeared to be taking steps, and he paused between each one. After the seventh of such pauses, Jerahab stopped. He turned back to his previous position and was now facing the children. An obvious course lingered where he had just walked, for with each step he took, his radiance seared a perfect path. Jerahab took a step back and then leaned forward, turning his head to the left. He carefully aligned the sphere into the seared path and then let go of it. This was the beginning of the establishing of the second age. From the pocket of his robe he withdrew a scroll with writing on both sides. He unrolled the parchment and briefly reviewed it. While examining the scroll, Jerahab's eyes welled and his lips pressed together. Then he dropped the top of the document and rolled it back up. Jerahab pressed his right hand into the universal sphere, and when he withdrew it, some of the chaotic darkness clung to a ring on his finger. A substance like white wax dripped off the ring and onto the scroll. Jerahab pressed the ring into the substance, sealing it with the mark of Owr. Jerahab released the scroll. It hung in the air as he repositioned his hands to secure his hold on the massive sphere. As he gazed down upon it, an intense light emitted from his hands. Then, with a deliberate motion, he opened his mouth as if to speak. Immediately, the screen froze. The children could see Jerahab standing there with the beginning of a word on his lips. "Rashawn, don't stop. I want to hear what he's going to say," Mia exclaimed. Rashawn had not stopped reading until he heard Mia call out. "I did not stop," Rashawn responded. "Then why is Jerahab frozen in outer space?" Miklehi threw out. "He is not in outer space," Aaron corrected him. "He is far beyond anything we know, and that is why it is called the Great Unknown." Rashawn had to smirk at Aaron's comment. "Well, since the screen has apparently paused on its own, are there any questions or comments about what we have just witnessed?" Andrew sat replaying what he had just seen. "I know that I don't really understand how Jerahab can be outside of the entire universe, yet able to fit within it too," pondered Andrew. "But now I really don't understand how he can be outside of it and move it around. Or how about how he pulled that stuff out of it and sealed the scroll?" "That was really cool," commented Morris. "I don't understand why he moved it several steps over from where he was if there is nothing else out there," Megan stated. "Who says there's nothing out there? Maybe we just can't see it yet," retorted Simon. "There has to be something for Jerahab's path to sear into." Rashawn was pleased with how much thought the children were putting into the conversation. Before he could say anything else to the children, the theater screen showed Kohengal begin to move. "I believe this is my cue to continue reading," Rashawn said. He found his place at the beginning of a new paragraph. Kohengal stood beside the table of happenings with his hands resting upon the side rails as he gazed deep into the table. There were no visible scenes dancing across the glassy top as the children had seen before. Kohengal's eyes moved around the interior of the table following a series of events. Then he focused on one spot. Kohengal lifted his right hand without a word and stretched it out over the table. With a slight circular motion, the image of a blackened afar rose to the surface. A fine, hair-like line slid off the image and lay across the surface of the table. Kohengol stared at the blackened afar hovering above the table's surface. He removed his hand from over the image. He turned his attention to a set of shelves nearby where 7 golden trumpets and 7 empty vials rested. Reaching up to the top shelf, he took hold of the first empty vial. Kohengol took a deep breath as he dipped the vial into the blackness around afar. The vial turned black as it filled with judgment. Then, setting the vial aside, he reached into the midst of the table where the thin, hair-like line laid and pulled out a silver pendulum. He placed the pendulum directly above the image of afar. It remained suspended above the stone of fire, awaiting Kohengol's command. At that same moment, in the northern sector of Elenthial, where the throne of the coming king stood, the ground forcefully shook. As with the table of happenings, a hand was seen pulling a string. A teardrop-shaped pendulum rose out of the center of the alabaster mountain and reflected the sapphire throne. The majestic colors of the surrounding mountains danced on the pendulum as Kohengol's hand disappeared. With all things set in place, he gently wrapped both hands around afar. An intense light emerged from his hands as he opened his mouth, as if to speak. Not a word was heard. The 2 figures stood still as the third screen drew the children's attention to Nekemebed. The blackness within the cosmos weighed heavily upon afar. Nekemebed's presence blanketed the stone. With a mighty quake, Nekemebed released his hold from afar's surface. The rapid movement caused a massive tidal wave that followed his path across the entire face of the stone. This also sent a series of vibrations into the core of the planet. Nekemebed's form grew enormous in comparison to the stone of fire. He stood erect with his arms wide and his face toward Salem. A loud, sweeping noise rang through the cosmos as he inhaled the protective fires from the Elenthial gates. The outer edge was pushed back and the waves were uncovered. Each of the 4 gates of Elenthial was immediately stripped of their fire. 4 ravenous whirlwinds traveled through the blackened cosmos. As they moved, they left trails of ashes. Nekemebed continued to inhale until the 4 fiery whirlwinds culminated between him and Salem. The fires had arrived with such velocity that his hair and robe had whipped in the air. A great explosion sound shot back into Elenthial as the fires merged into one gigantic whirlwind which echoed throughout the table of happenings to confirm that all was in place. Nekemebed drew in another breath. The whirlwind elongated and followed his draw. He suddenly held one of the golden trumpets from the lower shelf in Elenthial Hall in his hand. As the whirlwind flowed toward his mouth, a part of it entered the trumpet and was locked within. The remaining part of the whirlwind reached Nekemebed's mouth. It flowed smoothly past his lips and disappeared. Nekemebed stood on the surface of the waters with his mouth open, ready to speak. The angelics in Elenthial gasped as they heard the roaring sound of the fires exiting the gates. The gates stood completely unsecured from the Owr-gen. Negad and Shatar began to move toward the westward gate. "Have you been briefed on this?" Shatar shouted out to Negad as they moved with urgency. "No, I told you, I do not have any idea what is happening. I need my men to return to the communications center to await any commands." As they quickly walked, Shatar signaled a group of his troops to join him. "They will set up a strong perimeter around the gates. We must not allow the evil to penetrate the Elenthial borders." "Shatar, I do not understand what is happening. We see Jerahab beyond the universe, and I believe Kohengol is in the Elenthial Hall. Let me return to the communications center and find out what needs to be done. We will be ready for your call. I will send word to the temple and reinforce my messengers." The 2 of them arrived at the gate just as Negad had finished his comments. The ground quaked as the unsecured gate bulged from the force of the Owr-gen against it. Negad and Shatar both called the other members of the host forward, but before Negad could turn to leave for the communications center and the host could block the gate, a booming voice filled all of eternity. The screen from Elenthial was quickly replaced with the frozen images of Jerahab, Kohengol, and Nekemebed. Although divided into 3 persons, the theater held the complete image of Owr. Hey, all their mouths look the same, Alyssa said. I bet they're going to say the same thing, added Morris. Get ready to cover your eyes again. I feel it coming, Alyssa announced. Before the conversation could continue, all three screens moved into action. Unidentified words shot forth through the air. The sound of the voice pierced the upper part of Elenthial while simultaneously blasting forth through the cosmos, and it came from the great unknown. As the last word rang out, a stream of pure light exploded through the gates and into the cosmos. Every angelic standing was immediately knocked to the ground, and all lay face down as they felt the very presence of Owr travel over them. Near the Elenthial Hall, the doors of the realm of the regions shook as well. Every creature standing in the region's doorway shrunk back into safety. The regions buzzed with excitement. This may be it. Hold on, echoed in sync the cry of the four regions' leaders. The children sat in the theater, squinting again from the surge of light. I told you this was coming, Alyssa exclaimed. Rashawn kept reading as the light once again flooded the room, but this time the children's eyes quickly adapted. The screen's display changed back to a panoramic view of the entire cosmos. It was the exact scene from the first time light filled the theater. The cosmos was adorned with the image of a cross in perfect light. Do you see that? Remarked Rachel. Yeah, and the very center of the cross engulfs afar, Joshua screamed in excitement. No wonder we couldn't see anything before. Owr's light was concentrated on afar, commented Andrew. I like this view much better. It doesn't hurt my eyes. As the light exploded past the four Elenthial gates and into the cosmos, it followed the paths of the whirlwinds. The blasts of Owr's pure light sent the Owr fleeing in every direction. Trails of ashes remained where the Owr was not quick enough to escape. The ashes were pushed back out of the light's path with the remaining Owr that had escaped, creating 4 areas of compressed blackness. Nekemabed remained firm on the waters as his light merged with Jerahab's and Kohengal's light, engulfing afar. The ground underneath him cracked as it broke loose from the hold of the chaotic waters. Shatar cautiously rose to his knees and looked over to Nagad. Are you all right? I am fine. I have to get back to headquarters, Nagad had started to say, but stopped mid-sentence. The two of them were joined by a crowd staring out of the western gate. It's beautiful, an angelic next to Shatar declared, pointing at the enormous ray of light penetrating the cosmos. Yes, it is, Shatar replied. Should we follow it into the cosmos? No, we need to wait for our orders. Nagad, can you get back to the communication center and find out what is going on? I will send you word as soon as I know something, Nagad assured before disappearing. The crowds around each Elenthial gate witnessed the radiant power of Owr's light exploding into the darkened cosmos. From their positions, they could only see brilliant light. They did not know that the Owr was just behind the bright beams. In the Elenthial hall, Kohengal watched afar break loose from the waters. He carefully slid one hand underneath the image of the stone of fire. His other hand moved higher on the sphere. He plunged his fingers through the waters and spun the stone. The waters quivered from the vibrations of the stone's motion. The stone spinning shook the interior of the table of happenings. The fine line that lay across its surface began to expand. It was the same line from which the pendulum string had been lifted. To the naked eye, the table appeared to enlarge, but in reality, the events within the table were unfolding like an accordion being stretched out to its fullest capacity. Afar began to rapidly spin in a clockwise motion. With the stone's acceleration, the 4 major beams of light within the cosmos were heaved inward and filled the waves. The waves had been re-established by the separation of the darkness and light. A single shaft of light running between the waves and the eastern gate of Elenthial remained. Meanwhile, in the great unknown, Jerahab softly tapped the universal sphere. He quickly positioned his hands back around it and gently moved them in the opposite direction, causing the giant sphere to slowly rotate counterclockwise. Its journey down the seared path had begun. Another low rumble rolled through Elenthial. The air within the northern sector stirred and caused a gust of wind to knock against the pendulum. A quiet voice was carried on the wind. Let it begin." Immediately, the pendulum moved into an arranged circular pattern while swaying back and forth. The first tick of time rang out, and the chaotic elements of afar were being put back into perfect order. The wind carrying the command tickled everyone's ears. "Let what begin?" Shatar questioned in silence. "I hope Nagad sends word soon." The screens in the theater that showed Owr's 3 persons working simultaneously suddenly consolidated into one picture of afar that dominated the screen. The children saw the stone whipping around underneath the chaotic waters as Owr's light within the waves shined through the judgment waters. Then the theater filled with an echoing sound as if it was underwater. The screen flickered, and there was Nikal pinned down on his back.